Now that The Batman has arrived on HBO Max, I finally got the chance to sit down and watch this movie for the first time. And if you haven't seen already, I did post earlier my full in-depth spoiler review of this film, breaking out all my thoughts on The Batman and just how much I love this movie. So if you haven't already, definitely make sure to go check that out. But because of the love for this film, not only from myself, but pretty much everyone I've seen loves The Batman. And also with how successful the film has been, it's getting a sequel. Matt Reeves, the director of the film, has confirmed that we are getting a sequel. We're also, of course, getting multiple spin-offs on HBO Max as well. And it's now that I've actually seen the movie and I know what happens and I know what's been set up and all that stuff, I wanted to do a separate video talking about what I want to see in The Batman 2. What do I want to see in the sequel to The Batman? So we have a lot to talk about today, guys. Of course, obviously spoiler warning if you haven't seen it by now. You should have. It's been out on HBO Max for a couple days now, but still, I'm giving a spoiler warning anyway. But let's jump into this and talk about what I want to see in The Batman 2. So first of all, just talking about Batman, I want to see a more experienced Batman in the sequel, because that was actually one of the cool things about this first Batman movie, is that he was just in year 2 of his Batman career, and he was super inexperienced. He was very smart, he was solving these riddles super fast, but he was still making mistakes. And also, he of course learned the lesson throughout this film that he can't just be vengeance, he has to be a symbol for the citizens of Gotham City, and he can't just go around beating up criminals, he has to actually be a hero for Gotham City. So that's something I want to see him kind of adapting to those lessons, and actually taking that over to the Bruce Wayne side of things as well, because that's one of the biggest complaints I've seen with this movie, is that Bruce Wayne is basically Batman. Like, even when he's not wearing the suit, he acts like Batman, and that's not something I have a problem with, because again, it's just his second year, he's still getting used to things, and he acted like a child. So I would like to see, now that he's spent some more time as Batman, now that he's more experienced as the Batman, I'd like to see him finally adapt to creating more of a difference between Batman and Bruce Wayne, and bringing us that rich playboy version of Bruce Wayne that we know and love from the comics with this character. Now, once we do see this new side of Bruce Wayne, where he's all fancy and actually paying attention to his Wayne companies and all that stuff, I feel like this could bring us to something else that I feel like was very perfectly set up with the Batman, is Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. I want to see Harvey Dent introduced in this film, because again, it was perfectly set up. We saw in The Batman the death of Gil Colson, who was the district attorney, so we need a new DA, and why not have that be Harvey Dent, just like he is in the comics? It's the perfect setup to have that character come in here. Now, do I want to actually see him become Two-Face in the sequel? I mean, I'm not against it, but I think it'd be even cooler if we just have Harvey Dent as the district attorney in Gotham City, and maybe have him become friends with Bruce Wayne as well. That would be really cool, so that then when we do have his turn to Two-Face, whether that's in the third movie, one of the HBO Max spin-offs, whatever it is, somewhere down the line, it will have more of an impact, because you have that build-up to really make it more powerful. Now, speaking of new characters that I want to see introduced in this film, I want to see Robin. This is something that I didn't think was possible before I watched the movie, but now after watching the film, I actually feel like they realistically could do Robin, and Robert Pattinson has even said in interviews that he'd love to do Robin in this universe, as long as it's the 13-year-old version, which, would fit perfectly, because that's would be one of the biggest problems with doing Robin with this version of Batman, is that Robert Pattinson's pretty young, so to have a Robin, he'd have to be, super young, and I feel like doing a 13-year-old Robin would work. It's just that, we've never seen that before. We've never seen a proper Robin on screen, because it's always been, an adult version of Dick Grayson, and I don't really want that. I want that eventually when he becomes Nightwing, but I want him to start off as a kid when he is Robin, and that's something that they've talked about as being possibly something that Hollywood is afraid of, because, endangering a child, taking him out to be a crime fighter and stuff, that's not something that they want to really represent and encourage there. But I feel like this is the best Batman to do it with, again, not only because he's younger, so he could relate to it more, but I feel like also just because this is probably the most unhinged Batman that we've seen so far, still with the no-kill rule, but I feel like this is the type of Batman that would be willing to endanger a child's life and actually do Robin. I feel like that could be pretty cool. Now, whether we see that in the Batman 2 or maybe the third movie, I don't know. But I definitely really like to see Robin in this franchise. But if we don't get it, I'm fine with that too. Because, sure, it would be cool to see the Bat family. But I honestly prefer Batman going solo. So, I want to see Robin at some point. But I can wait a couple films for them to do that. Now, before we move on to talk about the new villains that I want to see introduced in the Batman 2, let's talk about some returning characters from the first film. So we have, of course, Zoe Kravitz as Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. Now, this is a character that I'm not sure if she's going to return in the sequel, because at the end of the Batman, she left Gotham City, she went off to go to Bloodhaven. And I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to spin her off into her own series on HBO Max and give her her own solo adventure. I feel like that could be pretty cool. Now, whether that would then, after that series, lead her back to Gotham City for an appearance in the Batman 2, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure if she is going to play a role in the next Batman movie, but I feel like she will return to this franchise at some point down the road, and again, hopefully she does get that spin-off on HBO Max. Now, speaking of spin-offs for HBO Max, we also have Colin Farrell as the Penguin, who is going to be getting his own spin-off on HBO Max, and is going to be, I believe it's going to start filming actually rather soon. So that will definitely be out before the Batman 2. And that is going to show Penguin's rise to power after the death of Carmine Falcone. And now with the city being flooded, it's really a great opportunity for that character to rise up into power and officially become the Penguin. So that could be some great setup to see him come into a larger role for the Batman 2. Or maybe, again, they'll save it for another future film down the road. Now, speaking of the whole Gotham being flooded thing, I feel like they are setting up a No Man's Land type storyline here, but then again, I'm not sure because it feels like it's a weird time to do that and almost too early, because the whole thing with No Man's Land is that basically Gotham gets super messed up, so all the villains take over and they take over their own territories within Gotham City. It's pretty cool, but given the fact that we don't really have that many villains introduced so far, it's perfect for Penguin, because, it's a great opportunity for him to rise up into power. So maybe this whole Gotham being flooded thing will actually be resolved in the Penguin series. That's something I totally see being a possibility, because, it could work in the sequel, especially for the villain that I have in mind, but I just don't feel like they're fully going to do a full-on No Man's Land storyline in the Batman 2. Now, finally, before we move on to that big villain, I do want to talk about the kind of post-credit scene from the Batman movie, or at least what should have been the post-credit scene. It was just a scene at the end of the movie where we had the Riddler in Arkham Asylum, and we saw him talk to Barry Keoghan's Joker, and it said that they were going to team up, they're going to be friends and everything, and so a lot of people took this as, Joker is going to be the main villain of the Batman 2, and no way that is happening. Matt Reeves himself has said that that's, not at all in his plans, and just because you saw that scene with the Joker doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to ever see him in the movies again. I feel like he's going to have a bigger role in the HBO Max side of things, where it is rumored that he's going to have a very large role in that Arkham Asylum spin-off series for HBO Max. But now, let's talk villains, ladies and gentlemen. So there's a lot of really cool villains that they could adapt to this franchise that I really want to see. I guess a few honorable mentions would be, Bane would be pretty cool, especially given the adrenaline thing that Batman used in the Batman. That could be a setup for that. But I feel like it's a little early for that. They need to set up more with Bane. I'd love to see a Professor Pig, but I feel like that might be a little too dark for PG-13, and I don't really feel like he could be a main villain, but a cool side villain I feel like could be a pretty cool role for him. Hush is one that I would love to see, but I feel like it would be too similar to what they just did with the Riddler in the Batman, because what they did with that character is very similar to Hush in the comics. And it also kind of goes the same with Court of Owls, because their whole thing is that they're behind the corruption in Gotham City. We just did a whole movie about the corruption being exposed, so I'm not really sure if they would do a whole Court of Owls movie, but maybe Carmine Falcone wasn't really behind everything. Maybe it was the Court of Owls. Maybe that's what Gil Colson was talking about, of you don't know how big this really is, and then for it to be revealed as Carmine Falcone, it was kind of a little disappointing and a little bit of a letdown, well, maybe it is the Court of Owls that are truly behind everything. I don't know. That could be an explanation, but I don't think they'll go into that with the Batman 2. Maybe the Batman 3 or 4, or wherever we get with that storyline, or possibly they could explore it more on the HBO Max side of things. Now, I have 2 more honorable mentions here with the Mad Hatter and Scarecrow. Scarecrow is just one of my favorite Batman villains, so of course I want to see him here. I feel like he could work really well in this world, but then again, we have seen quite a bit of Scarecrow lately. You know, obviously he was in the Dark Knight movies, all 3 of those. He was recently in Titans. So I feel like, you know, maybe they don't do Scarecrow, but he could definitely work there, and I definitely love to see him. And when it comes to Mad Hatter, you know, I'd like to see Mad Hatter, but I don't really know how exactly well they could fit him into this universe. I remember originally it was rumored that he was going to be in the Batman, and there was a rumor going around that he was going to be like a drug dealer. You can go back on my channel and go through my Batman playlist and actually watch that video, but it's a really interesting concept that I would love to see explored here. But when it comes to the Batman, the 2 main villains that I would love to see here, first of all, would be Clayface. Because Clayface is not only a villain that we haven't seen done on the big screen before, we have seen him in live action a couple times on TV, but I want to see him as the main villain of a live action Batman movie, because, you know, sure, it would be a little kind of hard to do, considering that this is a more grounded universe, and, you know, giant clay monster, that's not really what you think of when you think grounded, but they could make it more grounded, and I just think it's such an interesting, complex character that, you know, his story is so tragic, so to tell that story would be really cool, because, you know, he starts off as a famous actor, but then he loses his looks, and he turns into this crazy monster, and it could be kind of, maybe Frankenstein type story where it's like he can't control this, but he's turned into this monster and he doesn't want to be a monster or anything. They could possibly even do like a Beauty and the Beast type story as well, and add in a romance factor. I think that'd be pretty cool. But to have a shapeshifter going around and murdering people and have it be, because, you know, that's what I want to see with this franchise. That's what I loved about the first film, was that it was a detective mystery movie. So I want to see that going forward in the sequels, and they could do like a murder mystery, but having the murderer be somebody that can take on the form of anybody is really cool. And you could maybe even not do the full-on monster version of Clayface and do the very original version of Clayface from like, I don't know, I feel like it was probably like the 60s or something like that, when the character was first introduced, as literally a guy that just wore masks and went around murdering people as a serial killer. So they could do that kind of version of the character. I wouldn't mind that, but I would also really, really love to see, you know, full-on Clayface. But without a doubt, by far, the number 1 villain that I most want to see as the main villain of the Batman 2, and I know a lot of people want to see this, is Mr. Freeze. Because Matt Reeves has even said, you know, I'd like to do Mr. Freeze, and Mr. Freeze would work so well here. Because sure, we have seen him done in a previous Batman movie with Batman and Robin, but that was a very cheesy, not good version of the character, because it was basically just Arnold Schwarzenegger making ice puns, which were actually pretty cringy as well. But I want to see his storyline done justice, because again, just like Clayface is such a tragic character, an even more tragic character, because he, you know, if you don't know who Mr. Freeze is, basically he's this super smart scientist, but then his wife starts dying, so to save her, he freezes her using cryogenics, and he then actually ends up falling in the cryogenics, and he becomes Mr. Freeze to this point where he has to wear this suit to stay in the cold temperatures or he's going to die, and he spends his life trying to save his wife from this disease, and he has to turn to a life of crime to do that, to be able to get money to perform his research and try and save his wife. So they could really add in, again, kind of like with what I'd like to see with Clayface, add in a romance element of it. That'd be really integral to Mr. Freeze's story, and would just be a really cool character to see done in this universe, because I feel like seeing what Matt Reeves did with the characters in the first Batman movie, I'd love to see his take on Mr. Freeze, especially if they adapt that original storyline for the character, like Heart of Ice from Batman Animated Series, or even Batman Sub-Zero. That'd be a nice storyline to tackle as well. But Mr. Freeze would just be so cool, and I'd love to see Matt Reeves' version of the character. And you could say that that's not really a grounded character either, and he isn't really, but I'd like to see this universe get a little fantastical, because I mean they could technically explain Mr. Freeze with, like, you know, cryogenics, like that's an actual real life science thing, like you can explain the science behind it, but I do hope they tap into a little bit of fantastical elements with, like, oh, you know, he turned into an ice guy and needs this suit to survive. So yeah, I'm really hoping that we do get to see Mr. Freeze in the Batman 2, and going back to what I was alluding with before, with how this could actually be utilized and kind of set up with the whole Gotham being flooded thing, because, you know, if Gotham's filled with water, that could connect to him turning it to ice or something. I don't really know how exactly it would work, but maybe even Gotham being flooded could have something to do with his wife Nora getting that disease, possibly like the water was polluted and, you know, she drank it or something. So I don't know exactly how it would play out, but it's just an idea. And I really want to see Mr. Freeze in the Batman 2, or at least some point in this franchise. I feel like this would be the perfect time to introduce this character and tell his story. But guys, that is what I want to see in the Batman sequel. You can, of course, let me know your own thoughts and theories in the comments below. What do you want to see in the Batman 2 for actual characters here with the Batman, you know, his new story, new experience Batman? Do you want to see returning characters like Selina Kyle, Catwoman? Do you think the Penguin will be in here? Do you want to see Robin? What do you think about Harvey Dent? And what villains do you want to see in the Batman 2? So guys, for now, thanks for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video and hit the subscribe button so I can keep you up to date on everything that goes on in the DC life.